the review of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Joining us to look at that this morning is Professor of Political Economy and Development Studies, Sam Egwu. Good to have you join us this morning.
Yeah, thanks.
There are a whole lot of issues in that. I decided not to talk about indigenship and some other issues that we'll be looking at in the Constitution, because you've done quite a number of research works in that. Let's start with the Constitution. What's your thinking of the present Constitution before we get into the details of some of those grey areas which would need the desired review?
Well, I think I'm not going to say anything new about the present Constitution that many people haven't said before. The first one is the process that brought the Constitution into being. And it has not really, it didn't depart from the tradition that we're used to. People think it was not consultative enough, and that it was imposed, as it were, by a departing military regime. And therefore, it lacks the legitimacy that you require in terms of the participation of people, in terms of inclusivity, and in terms of the substance, in the Constitution. And I think the issue really is that a Constitution is not simply a legal document. I think it is even more political, because in the Constitution is the notion of a social contract between the people and the government. And what that means is that the people's desires and wishes have to be reflected in the Constitution. Because if you look at our Constitution, there are very critical sections that really tell you that a Constitution is not simply a document you can toy with. It is about obligation, that government have to citizens and expectations of citizens from government. And to that extent, a Constitution that should be, the basis of governance, should capture the diversity of opinion of people, and also take on board their views in terms of what they expect from the government. So I think it's quite critical to the whole notion of social contract, and I think the process is therefore critical.
So you believe that, it is incumbent, it is ill-constructed. If you agree that the Constitution that we have at the moment is incumbent?
Yeah, that's the point I'm making. The point, you see, it may be a very elegant document.
Right.
Right? It may be well crafted. But if you look at the Constitution, and I will just give you an example. This Constitution says, Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Now, if you look at the provisions in the Constitution, it does not really tell you about federalism. For example, as we have said over the years, this country is actually federal in name, but in practice it's more unitary. And you can see that. I've listened to a lot of debate on this. Just look at the federal, exclusive legislative list, which contains about 68 items. And many of the issues that you find there ordinarily should not be exclusive. A federal system, as we all know, is about, ensuring that too much power is not concentrated, in the center, because a federal system is about subsystem autonomy. A country chooses to be federal precisely because it has had federal qualities.
Which means you agree with the fact that there should be a national conference before the Constitution is, can be totally reviewed.
Well, the issue about the national conference, and I think we need to be very clear about this, because some people have said, well, what we want in this country is a sovereign national conference. Some people say, well, you can't have a sovereign national conference. All you need to have is a national conference. But I think those who talk about a national conference, as one important way of building legitimacy for the constitutional review process, are actually putting on the table one perspective to the problem. Okay, and I think those who are saying we need a national conference as the only basis for making a new constitution,
well, how is this,
and they have their own arguments.
How is this tenable? Because from the rules of procedure now, the sole responsibility of drafting a constitution is enshrined within the powers of the National Assembly. Now, so even if we're having a national conference, wouldn't that be a talking shop?
Again, you see, I think we need to be very realistic. This thing is about power relations. I was the convener of the Citizens Forum for Constitutional Reform for many years. And what we did in the Citizens Forum was to advocate for a more open, more legitimate process of making the Constitution. And one of the issues we had to contend with was the proposal that the best way to do it is through a sovereign national conference. And the position we canvassed then was that the sovereignty of this country belongs to the people, and the people already, whether you have an election that was flawed or not, have already, conferred this sovereignty through their their representatives are actually exercising this sovereignty. So that is the legal position today. So if you then want a sovereign national conference, there's a major problem. And I've said, if you want a national conference that is not convened by the authorities of this country, how are you going to enforce it? So, and I keep telling people, I say, look, if you want to start a revolutionary project, that is a different agenda. I am for a revolution in this country, in which case you are going to upturn everything in this country and get the people to start, a process of building their country. But then that is a different political project. But as it is today, in my opinion, we just have to build a constitution. We need to have a modality of getting the input of the people into the process, and we can do that, in a very interesting way as it is being proposed today. In fact, if you look at the history of constitution making in Africa, there are actually three broad approaches, to constitution making. One is the one we are used to in this country, where a small set of elites sit in a room and craft a constitution for the people. The other one, which countries like Ethiopia and others have gone through, and including South Africa, is to have an open consultative process in which the people, decided what type of constitution they want. Now you have that process, and then there's a midway where you don't have this narrow elite, approach to constitution making, and you don't have this open system.
How binding is
a consultative process that meets the people halfway?
How binding is how effective is the village square approach that you've mentioned now?
Well, it's about choice. In countries where it has happened, they had their own peculiar history, and they needed to start afresh, and there was a consensus across the country.
Will that really be applicable in a situation like Nigeria?
I really do not think so, and that is the point I was making. This is about power relations, and therefore, if you have a particular perspective, you must also weigh your options in terms of your capacity to put your agenda on the table. So if some people are saying, well, let's go for a sovereign national conference, I think they have to admit, and they have to be realistic, that it is not about, it's good to canvass this position, but that you must also be practical in terms of how can this be a genuine process given the power equation at the moment.